too often has been the case, then Congress is going to say, and I'm going to be part of it, then I'm going to say, if somebody else isn't going to do anything, we're going to at least do something.
What would something look like?
Well, I'm not
trade
sure.
Restrictions.
Well, immediately, that something means we keep Jackson Vanik on the books. Now, if there are other alternatives, I don't know what they may be, and I think we look at those. But I think a priority for the United States ought to continue to be human rights protection. And I say that whether it is Soviet Jews or blacks in South Africa or where it is. I think that's something we as a nation have to continue to stand for.
Okay. We've talked a bit about the links between trade and human rights in Soviet Union. What about the arms race and the issue of human rights? How do you, is there a link there? What is that link?
There is a link. I think we have to be careful how we make that link. However, the link should not be, we'll enter into an arms agreement with you if you change your policy on human rights. I think that kind of a link would be a mistake, because we are all interested in survival. And if their policies continue to be bad, but we could enter into an effective arms control agreement, frankly, I would favor an arms control agreement. But there is a link, and that link is this, that part of achieving an arms control agreement is achieving greater understanding between our people. And one of the barriers to greater understanding is clearly the human rights area. And it is, and again, it's while the Jewish community is the primary concern here, the way Pentecostals have been treated is also a concern. It's the whole thing. The divided spouses, majority of them have been Jews. Exactly why some people are chosen and others not, I don't know. Mm-hmm. But there is clearly a tinge of anti-Semitism involved in the decisions that have been made by the Soviet Union in this area. So the answer is there is a link between human rights and arms control, simply because the human rights violations stand as a barrier to understanding and trust between our two countries. And that understanding and trust has to be a little greater before we're going to get real progress in arms control.
Mm-hmm. In this recent instance, though, of the Soviets agreeing to a moratorium on nuclear testing and our insistence on going ahead, just recently exploding another underground device, it sort of muddies the waters on who's looking good on that issue, who's taking the righteous stand. How do you explain this? How do you understand this your own self?
Well, I happen to think our stand is wrong. My belief is that since we can verify with seismography today of what happens in the area of tests, we can enter an agreement saying let's not have any more nuclear tests. I think we ought to do that. We are going ahead with tests, frankly, because we have a certain type of weapon we want to perfect. But the lesson of history is very clear. We'll go ahead and perfect that weapon. And what will the Soviets do? They'll go ahead and perfect the weapon. And the arms race just continues. We ought to be moving away from the arms race and not increasing it. But again, I think that gets back to this whole area of what we stand for, and that what we ought to be doing between our two countries is trying to remove barriers that cause misunderstanding. And we create some too. Sometimes our political rhetoric is much too heated. Sometimes theirs is. But the human rights side of things over there is part of it. And I would add one other thing, a book that I would recommend you read if you haven't, or your viewers to read, is a book by David Wyman called The Abandonment of the Jews. It talks about what happened during World War II and how we in the United States, Christians and Jews alike, we didn't stand up like we should. I don't want to repeat that history. And we ought to be standing up wherever there are problems. That means for the Jews in the Soviet Union, it means for blacks in South Africa, it means for people wherever they are oppressed. that ought to be part of the legacy of what we learned from World War II.
It really isn't just enough to expect our legislators to stand up, but I assume you'd agree that people need to make a personal commitment as well to stand up for these issues.
Absolutely, and that personal commitment is important to convey to policymakers, but it is also important to convey just little things like sending letters to refuseniks. And sometimes you send them through the mail. They rarely will ever get there, but Soviet officials at least know that there is an interest on the part of someone on the outside, and that's important. Second, when there are friends traveling to the Soviet Union, you can get letters to people. Send a letter over through a friend who's going to the Soviet Union, say, get this delivered to whoever it is.
Do you have to hide those letters going in, or can you just come in with those letters?
You have to hide them, but you know, you're going to have all kinds of papers and things.
Okay.
Generally, you can get by doing that, and at the worst, they're going to grab the papers and they may destroy them at the, you know, when you come in at Moscow or Leningrad or.
But again, you've told them, but you've still made a stand.
You've made the stand, and that is extremely important.
And phone calls. I mean, you really can call them.
Phone calls you can get through. Once in a while you get cut off, and once in a while you don't get through in the first place.
Happens with my phone service too.
Yeah, but I mean, it is much more the case over there. And one of the things that happens, you also have to arrange to. Usually the refuseniks lose their telephone service, and so they have to go to the post office. You call to the post office and you arrange a time that you will call. But it is important. You know somebody's going to be listening to the phone call. But frankly, I welcome having Soviet officials listen in, because I know, number one, whoever it is I'm talking to gets a little hope and encouragement. Number two, Soviet officials are listening in. I want them to get the message that I'm concerned about this person too. Recently
in this area we had great success with Yuri Tarnopolsky, who the Chicago committee had been trying to get out in a congregation in Glencoe, and he's released and says that he owes it to all the housewives who were called and sent letters, and so it really does have an impact.
It really does, and you know, and they're right here in the Chicago area. We've had a number of Simon Levin had not seen his little 9-year-old son until he flew over to Vienna and met his wife and son over there. One of these strange things, he'd never seen his own son. I'd been in Moscow, seen his son a couple of times. He hadn't seen his son. Fran Pergericht, husband, Roman Cooperman, is now over here. We've had some victories, not only in Illinois but around the nation, but we want to have a lot more.
Well, thank you. I think you're right. We do want to have a lot more, and this has been very helpful to us in guiding us in that direction, give us some better understanding of how to understand those changes in the Soviet Union now. We look forward to more from you, and we thank you for joining us
today. And I thank you for your interest in this subject. If I can do I have 10 seconds?
Take it.
Let me mention Abe Stolar, another case, a Chicagoan. I won't give you all the circumstances. He's a U.S. citizen. He and his wife and his son, his daughter-in-law, want to come over here. They ought to be able to come. If anybody from the Soviet consulate is watching this, I want them to remember Abe Stolar.
They never miss a show of ours.
All right.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us as well. Good day.